Welcome back. In this week's episode, there's not a lot of different things like I've had in the past. This is primarily working on a 1970 Honda 750 KO. It's Honda's first generation 750. Belongs to that same farmer up the street. Told him I'd get it going for him. He'd like to ride it again. So we're going to see a lot of footage on that in this episode. But the frame sitting next to me has an extremely interesting story. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in this episode, but in the coming weeks you're going to see a lot of this, especially as the story of what this motorcycle actually is unfolds and the importance that it played in my family. So anyway, welcome to this episode and hope you enjoy it. Picked up this 1970 Honda 750 from the farmer up the street that I did some car work for a little while back. He hadn't run this in a long time. I know it's going to need carb work like everything else. We're going to pressure wash this thing off, get it looking good, pull the carburetors off, and see if we can't get this thing running for him again. Now that we got it cleaned off, we're going to go after these carburetors and get them cleaned up. One thing we noticed right away is at the throttle there's no response there. And this is a 1-into-4 carburetor, or cable system for the carburetors rather. So one of these slides or maybe more is stuck. So we're going to pull these out one at a time until we can figure out which one it is. Hopefully it's not a cable that's a problem. Hopefully it's going to be one of the carburetors. We can get that ironed out and make this thing work again. This slide came out pretty easily, and the throttle is still a little stuck, but there is some movement in the cable, which is a good sign. So we're going to pull this other outer one out now and see if this one might have been the problem. It's got to be one of the four. Alright, that one came out pretty easily. Don't see a lot of scarring on it. We'll try the throttle again. There's a little bit of movement there, but it's still stuck, so it's either going to be one of these other two or the cable. So with all of them out, this one looks to be the worst. Once we got the two centers out, this thing works really well now. So as we're moving the throttle, you can see these things moving pretty readily, so that's a good sign. That means the cables are good. So now just cleaning up these slides and getting the carburetors cleaned up, and I think we're going to be good. Alright, it wasn't too much trouble to feed these things from the air box, so we got them pulled out and put them up on the bench. First thing we'll do is pull the bowls off so we can get to the jets and everything. We'll get the carburetor bodies taken care of, and then we'll focus on the slides. Alright, we got the bowls loose now, so we'll get these pulled off, see how bad they look inside. They're pretty nasty, but they will clean up. I was visiting one of my past graduates recently, Aaron Kearns of Route 1 GMC, and he'd been watching all the episodes and reminded me of something that I said when he was a student, how I don't teach carburetors because it's an old technology and it's nothing that they're going to need to know in working on cars in the field. And that's still a true statement, I stand by that. But he thought it was funny that pretty much every episode I'm doing something with some carburetor, and this episode's no different. The reality is when you're messing with stuff like this, whether it's motorcycles, tractors, lawnmowers, or whatever, and people let them sit too long, especially with the gas we have today, it doesn't take long for them to go bad, things to go wrong in the carburetors. Even though I don't teach it, it is something that is useful for what I do. And he even said that it might have been good to talk about it in the classes, at least have a little bit of background of it. So I'll consider that once we're back in school. That might be something I'll spend a couple of days on to talk about fuel metering and things like that and carburetors. And in case they have to mess with them, then they'll know what they're in for. But you really have to know what you're doing if you go into these things and what each of the circuits does, and they all play a very important role in any vehicle that they're used on. So again, you really have to know what's going on with these things and take special care with them. So the best thing to do, almost like with anything else, is just to search out who the experts are. And I don't necessarily mean on YouTube, but find these people, absorb that information and knowledge, because as the years go by, especially with me in the vintage tractors, the people who know a lot about them, they're going away, and unless that knowledge is passed on, it could be lost. So absorb all you can when you can. So I'm letting each one of these soak for about 2 hours. and it seems to be doing the trick. This is one here that had already soaked for a little while, and this is one I haven't soaked yet. You can clearly see the difference inside and out. So we'll get them all looking like this, get the kit in it. Should run like new. Alright, so we'll spray them down now with some carburetor cleaner. You can actually use water as well to soak them in, but this works, I like this better. So get off the rest of the residue inside and out, and I'll show you what we're left with, just like the other one. Ports that are typically overlooked in carburetor rebuilds are these right here. This is the intake side of the carburetor, so as air flows through, it runs through that little port there and lifts fuel through the main circuit at idle. That's the pilot circuit. So with that clogged, wouldn't idle very well. It'd be hard to adjust. So this one, as I was blowing through it, I knew that we were plugged. I took a piece of electrical wire, shaved it back, and took a couple of strands so that I could gently massage through the port to clean it out. And now when I blow through there with a gum cutter, it flows freely. This is what I was talking about here. When I blow through this one, you see it coming through the bottom there from the main. So now we know we're going to get fuel fed through this one at idle. I got this John Deere 316 in a deal a little while back. Picked it up for a little of nothing. Guy couldn't get it running, couldn't figure out why. And all it was this fuel line. This fuel line here is dry rotted so bad it was sucking air, wasn't allowing any fuel to come from the gas tank for the pump to actually function. So replaced this line, spritzed it a little bit with some starting fluid, and it runs great. Actually runs better than the 318 that I just sold the other day. So anyway, now I can get this one ironed out and posted, and we'll let this one go too. Take it down for these, it's up the far side. Back to that, okay? The rest of it should be intact. This is a 1936 Harley-Davidson that I picked up from a guy down the street today. And after I'd already made the deal to purchase the motorcycle, I found out some very interesting history on this bike. It was actually owned by my family as far back as the 70s by one of my uncles. He had purchased it out of Mississippi, drug it to Alabama and Tennessee, and then ended up in Virginia. This guy down the street ended up purchasing it, and then it came back to me. Actually on the very property where this bike was originally picked up in Virginia. So I'm very happy to own it and get this thing back together. So hopefully you'll follow along in the restoration of this bike. Next time on Bulldog Builds, we'll start putting the Honda 750 carburetors back together. I've got to get more of these pull tractor panels completed, and we'll clean up the Harley frame, do some assessing, and begin the process of putting this bike back together. See you next week.